Hey guys, great episode for you today. Talk about a lot of stuff. So, for one, I review an awesome podcast episode I listened to with Theo Vaughn and Ethan Klein. It's awesome episode. You should go listen to that podcast. Also, you should listen to this podcast, of course. I talk about a little bit of how they discuss anxiety, they discuss depression, they discuss their interview with Bill Burr. It was really good. I talk about what goes on in Hong Kong, some new news there. And we talk about Prince Andrew dealing with Epstein and Kanye coming to my hometown. So follow me on, you can email me, tayradio1 at gmail.com, tayradio1 at gmail.com. You can follow me on YouTube, subscribe, like and subscribe at Taylor Space Stutch, Taylor Space Stutch, Stuch. Go to my website, tstutch.com, tstuch.com. Follow me on Twitter, tstutch1. Thank you guys. Enjoy the episode. Okay, let's begin. Let's jump right in. So, I love podcasts. I love YouTube. I love watching comedians and their podcasts on YouTube. And one podcast that I have not listened to in a while is Theo Vaughn's. I'm a big fan of Theo Vaughn. For some reason, I just hadn't really been tuning into his material, though I've been tuning into H3H3's material quite a bit. And there was something popped up on my YouTube, and it was Ethan Klein from H3H3 going on to the Theo Vaughn podcast. And so I thought this was going to be a really interesting episode. And sure enough, it was. I just want to talk about it a little bit because there are some interesting things in there and also some really relevant things, I think, to the time. So first off, it was really funny. If you guys haven't seen it, you need to go watch the interview with Theo Vaughn and Bill Burr. So Bill Burr just was like, I love Bill Burr's comedy, but he was a total fucking asshole to Theo Vaughn. And I'm not sure why people have different competing theories. Like maybe he was tired of going on a podcast, this, that, and the other. I gotta stop saying this, that, and the other, for God's sakes. There was a lot of, speculation as to why he was not having a good time on the podcast. But it was pretty interesting to watch. Basically, Theo Vaughn, his type of comedy is he makes up a lot of shit. So Theo Vaughn makes up stories that never happened to him. He makes jokes about things that, he says stuff that is so absurd that it's not, he knows it's total bullshit. And basically, Bill Burr was just calling him out the whole time, just basically talking shit to him. And so it was funny. Anyway, Bill Burr was on the H3H3 podcast twice. And Ethan and Theo Vaughn were basically bonding over the fact that both of them had some really bad interviews with Bill Burr. So that was a very entertaining part of the podcast. They basically were kind of analyzing what went wrong with their interviews of Bill Burr. And it was really cool. I don't know. I thought it was interesting to hear Theo Vaughn's take on his interview with Bill Burr, because he basically shook some stuff out and was like, look, I basically think that Bill Burr is the same way he is on stage and off stage. He's probably just eternally disgruntled. And I thought that was really funny because I think that's true. Bill Burr has a podcast and he's a stand-up comedian. He's got a podcast that's been very successful, I believe. And he pretty much sounds very similar. His comedy is kind of based on things that he's pissed off about or unhappy with or angry with. And that's basically how he's made his career. And it's funny because Theo Vaughn was like, well, maybe that's just how he is all the time. And I thought, yeah, maybe that is how he is all the time. And what's super interesting about that is that I could see that being the case, especially because I've followed Bill Burr for a while. And Bill Burr has talked about his relationships, how I guess maybe it's the girl he's married to now, but for a long time, I think he had issues with relationships, and he's kind of had an issue with not really like an alcoholic, but he likes to drink. And I could totally see somebody with his temperament, which is kind of like an asshole type of attitude all the time. If you're always an asshole, I could totally see how like chicks like that to a degree, but from my experience, that wears down on people quickly. So I think women can be attracted to the asshole initially, and then after that, it's like, okay, all right, it was attractive at the beginning, but now you're legitimately being an asshole all the time. I don't like it. So I thought that was funny. And so Theo Vaughn and Ethan Klein from H3 have a recovery session, as they called it, a Bill Burr recovery session, which I thought was so funny. Now, there were some really interesting things that they brought up in their conversation. A big topic that they talked about throughout the podcast was mental illness, I guess, depression and anxiety, things of that nature. And we learned that Ethan has a Tourette's, or a form of Tourette's, which I didn't know about, but I guess is obvious. Like, I knew he had a problem because if you watch the H3 podcast, he's constantly moving around his eyebrows and closing his eyes in a really fucking weird way. And in this episode, they talked about depression and anxiety a lot. And Theo Vaughn talked a lot about how he's been dealing with depression for like a long time. Like, Theo Vaughn is older than a lot of people realize. I think he's 38, 37 years old, something like that. He ain't a young guy, though he looks like it. He's close to 40. He's close to midlife, baby. Hey, gang, close to midlife. And so it was interesting listening to their conversation about depression and anxiety, because they, the thing is you could look at it like it was kind of like, people have talked about, Joe Rogan being like the Oprah for men and stuff like that, I guess. And when they were talking about their depression, anxiety, and therapy, I thought one thing that was super interesting about it was that in this day and age, I don't really know. There seems definitely to be a problem with depression and anxiety nowadays, but it's hard to know if that has always been the case and people are just talking about it more, or if it's legitimately increasing, right? If depression and anxiety are actually going up, or if people are just talking about it more and identifying their problems more readily. And especially, I think currently, I really liked the way that Theo Vaughn and Ethan Klein were talking about it, because they weren't doing it in a really pussy way. So currently, in our current day and age, we're encouraged, men are basically told we're toxic masculinity, we need to be more feminine, we need to be less masculine, blah, blah, blah. And, like there's a song that I fucking can't stand where this chick is singing about how she loves the way this boy cries, or this guy cries, because it shows that he's alive. It's, oh my God, it's sickening, because I'm just thinking like, no, you don't want a puss man as your guy. You don't want a guy who cries and bitches and moans, which is one reason I liked this podcast between Theo Vaughn and Ethan, is because it wasn't like a complaining bitching session. It was like a talking about the revelations they've had in their lives about anxiety and depression. How Ethan kind of talked about how he's had this inner dialogue of like how this inner dialogue tells him like, oh, you're a piece of shit, or you're not good enough, and this, that, and the other, and how he had to work through many obstacles, and how he's taking antidepressants now. But it wasn't like a complain fest. Like what was interesting about it, one thing I really liked about it, was that they didn't put the blame on anybody. I think that's really a key difference to what we hear about with grievance culture nowadays, and what I think is really cool about some of these, like what you hear about these guys that are on, that talk about their issues in a masculine way. See, I'm going to go out and say this. I think that you to talk about your issues in a masculine way is to take ownership of your problems, to take ownership of your faults, and say, look, dude, I had a fucking problem. I had an issue, and I could not get out of it. That was one thing that Ethan talked about. And he described how when he was going through his anxiety and depression stages where they were really bad, and he was kind of just lashing out at people and being irritated all the time, he discussed how it felt as though he was a prisoner to his emotions, and he just didn't know what to do about it. And he went to therapy, and he started taking some antidepressants, and his life has turned around. What I thought about was so cool is that he didn't sit there and say, it's this system, right? It's this patriarchal system that puts external pressures on men to be a certain way. Same with Theo Von. Theo Von talked about how, it's interesting. Theo Von has some deep issues. He has some deep psychological issues because I've listened to his podcast for a few years now, on and off, and he always talks about how he's not comfortable like in his own skin with his own thoughts, but he never externalizes it. And I don't know if I'm using that term correctly, but he doesn't put it on the rest of the world. He doesn't say, it's this patriarchal system that's causing me problems. I love how he tries to approach his issues from a standpoint of his own responsibility. He goes to AA. He tries to stop watching porn. Yes, they both admit, Ethan and Theo talk about how, their problems, and I think this is a thing with therapy, how their problems can be rooted back to things they saw as kids and things like that. But ultimately, it's up to themselves to change. And I thought it's so valuable to look at your problems and to be able to say, it's your fucking fault. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause here for the sponsors. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody. Do you want to record your own podcast like me? Well, Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now, Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. That's right, mofos. It's easy. Check it out. So I want to say a couple more things about that podcast with Ethan and Theo. One thing they talked about was how growing up. Oh, yeah. So it was super interesting to me because Theo was like, I feel like I don't want to grow up sometimes. And I remember sitting there thinking like, what the fuck are you talking about? You don't want to grow up. You know what I'm saying? Like, dude, you're 38 years old. Like, you're 37 years old. Like, you're grown up, dude. You're not a high schooler or a college student on the verge of being an adult. Like, you are a full-fledged adult, brother. So what are you talking about? You don't want to grow up. And then Ethan brought up a good point how if you don't feel like you have had good role models as adults, then that could be, maybe that's an issue. And I would say, I do think that's a problem. I think that's a big problem with the current generation is as being babied, as a lot of people around my age group were kind of babied as they were being pushed through school and kind of being told, I've talked about this a lot, as people have not been encouraged to do a couple things. One, to embrace responsibility as we're young, and then also to really think outside of the box and think for ourselves and make decisions. So I think a lot of that, as a result of that, we see a lot of people struggling with growing up because when you grow up, you got to take responsibility for your own shit, right? You got to take responsibility for your debts. You got to take responsibility for your financial situation, for your relationships and all that. When a lot of people are still looking for somebody to show them the way. They're looking for somebody to grab their hand and say, this is the way we're going, so follow me and everything's going to be good. Now, I don't think there's a problem with having mentors, and I don't think there's a problem with having good role models and people that show you the way when you're young. But I think a lack of mentorship and a lack of good role modeling when people are kids leads to people just looking for someone to take them through life, as opposed to saying, "Oh, I know how an adult is supposed to act, so let me act this way." So that's what I wanted to say about that podcast. It was really good. It was really good. I highly recommend it. Theo Von's always entertaining. So let's continue on to the next segment. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Hong Kong. So, as people may or may not have been paying attention, the situation in Hong Kong has not stopped. So, I talked about this months back. I mean, probably 4 or 5 months ago, talking about the situation in Hong Kong, how I legitimately did not see a way forward, except confrontation. Or there's really only two ways the situation is going to resolve itself. Either Beijing is going to give in to the demands of the Hong Kong protesters and allow Hong Kong to be allow Hong Kong to self-rule, or there's just going to be massive protests, and there's for who knows long into the future until there's a bigger, wider conflict. So sure enough, the developments over the last few weeks have been incredibly addicting to watch, because as Beijing has been, or as Hong Kong and Beijing have been closing in on their grip of the Hong Kong people and the protests have been getting bigger and more out of control in some ways. And one of the bigger developments over the last week or so was the Hong Kong police were trying to storm a university, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and when they tried to storm it, there was a fierce resistance. So people inside the university they ended up barricading themselves into the school, into the university, and fighting back with like petroleum bombs and arrows and Molotov cocktails. It was extremely interesting to watch. And these people are fighting for their lives. They're fighting for their future. I don't know what to say about this situation sometimes, because I feel as though, I have a connection to Asia that I don't have to other parts of the world. I was there in college, and I was in China in college for a year, and I study Chinese all the time. And as a result, I feel, I know more about this part of the world than I do about other parts of the world. There's just a lot of stuff going on. So sometimes I feel as though I put a bigger weight on what's going on in Hong Kong than I would in other areas, like say Syria or Iraq or Iran. And that's probably true. But what's going on is fascinating. I mean, we are watching in real time. We're watching people struggling to retain their ability to self-rule and self-govern. And we, in the U.S., I've said before, I really don't think there's much of a place for U.S. intervention. I'm pretty much against U.S. intervention internationally at this point to begin with. I think we have to do a lot of rebuilding at home. I think we need to, we have a lot of problems. We're in 20-something trillion dollars of debt. We have broken down infrastructure. Our economy has been gutted as we have outsourced our manufacturing and other jobs all over the place. Our immigration system is just fucked. So to me, I'm like, look, I wish we could do something with Hong Kong, but I don't see what we can do. And then from a principle standpoint, I don't know if there's anything we should do except stand in solidarity. But beyond that, it's not our fight, if that makes sense. So anyway, what's going on currently is the students that were in the Hong Kong University, I guess they were running out of food and resources, so they all decided to flee, and a bunch of people from the city are helping them get out. A lot of them are helping. So if you're not watching what's going on in Hong Kong, you should. It's just fascinating, and we are seeing in real time how people are fighting for their freedoms because they know, and I've said this already, like this situation only had a couple ways to go. Either they give up and admit they're going to be ruled by Beijing, or they fight, and that's what they're doing. So it'll be interesting to see how this transpires. Let's continue with some more contemporary topics.
Yay!
Oh, right. So, has anyone been paying attention to the Jeffrey Epstein stuff with Prince Andrew? So, what's interesting is I'm reading something now on Twitter. It says Prince Andrew caught using the N word. So, in my opinion, this is not the story. This is not the interesting shit. And this is probably used. Okay, so let's talk real quick. Right now on Twitter, what's trending is that Prince Andrew, who is a prince of a certain area in the UK, it used the N-word. Okay, who cares? Who gives a shit? I don't care. Now, I'm not black. Maybe that's the problem. But it's like, okay, yeah, people say fucked up shit all the time, right? It's not that big a deal. What I think is going on is they're trying to cover up the fact that he's been implicated in some shit. So let's talk about that. So Prince Andrew, Duke of York, and Epstein. So he had an interview recently, and in the interview, there was some shit that came out. So he is accused, basically, there is evidence, lots of evidence that shows he was hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein a lot. And he's been implicated in Epstein's bad behavior. So Epstein got in trouble for trafficking underage girls. Prince Andrew has been caught in that web where there's pictures of him hanging with Epstein. There's allegations from girls that he was with them when they were underage. So there was an interview that came out which apparently made him look really bad. I didn't see the interview, but here's something from NBC News, which I'm not a fan of, but it says the Prince Andrew interview on ties to Epstein widely panned. The decision to speak to the BBC was seen as a gamble for the royals, who traditionally are tight-lipped and try to maintain a strong grip on their image. So, in his rare TV interview this weekend, would draw a line under allegations he had sex with a teenager who claims she was trafficked by financier Jeffrey Epstein. The interview, broadcast late Saturday by BBC Newsnight, has dominated headlines as the country processes the exchange in which the second son of Queen Elizabeth II denied having sex with a woman, Virginia Roberts Giuffre, when she was a teen. Some of Britain's newspapers, royal and social media commentators, criticized Andrew for defending his friendship with Epstein, failing to convey empathy for the victims of the convicted sex offenders, and for showing a lack of humility. Andrew under fire from the palace, read the Daily Telegraph. Not one single word of remorse, read the Mail on Sunday. Apologize to Epstein's victims now, Prince told, read the Guardian. So, former Buckingham Palace press, blah, blah, blah. People are scratching their heads in the UK as to how he has made a bad situation even worse. Basically, he looked really bad in the interview. I fully admitted that my judgment was probably colored by my tendency to be too honorable. That's just the way it was, he said, adding that with the benefit of hindsight, it was clear that it was the wrong thing to do, talking about his friendship with Epstein. So, there was a lot of weird shit that apparently came out in the interview, and he talked about how he could not have had sex with that underage girl because he was at Pizza Express. So Andrew has been criticized for his claims that the alleged encounter with Jeffrey in 2001 could not have happened on the date reported because he had taken his daughter, Princess Beatrice, to a party at a chain restaurant, Pizza Express. Asked why he remembered that day specifically, he responded, "Going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do. I think perhaps eyebrows will be raised as to why he's bringing his daughter into what is a very sordid saga," Tomney said. I don't know about that part. But anyway, Prince Andrew has been implicated in this pedophile kind of sex ring scandal. And it looks like, there's something that came out about his him being at this pizza restaurant. And I wonder if it has to do with Pizzagate, but I'm not sure. Basically, there were rumors that a lot of these pedophile types, these high profile, these very elite level guys that were dealing with underage girls, a lot of them were referring to them as like pizza, like they were using a lot of pizza references. So it's super interesting to me that this pizza reference was made in regards to the Epstein scandal. Maybe I'll have to watch that interview to get a better understanding of it. Then let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what's going on with Kanye. So Kanye visited a prison, 2 jails near my hometown of Houston. He and actually had a church service at Lake Woodlands Church, which is in downtown Houston. So, I say good for him, man. I've talked about him previously. I really like what Kanye's doing. Obviously, one, because I kind of come from the Christian faith, regardless of what I believe now exactly. I do think that it's beneficial for Western society in the United States to not lose total grasp of that. Also, I like that he's really putting his life, his reputation, his brand on the line for something he believes in, and what he believes in is powerfully positive, right? Bringing people to Jesus, bringing people to God is a good thing, in my opinion. But it's so interesting watching people on Facebook talk about this. Like, it's interesting. The black community is definitely divided over the Kanye stuff. Some people love him. Some people hate him because he stands with Trump. But I think it's great that he stands with Trump, man. I think it's awesome. Anyway, that's all I got to say for today. If you guys have any comments, questions, you can email me, tayradio1@gmail.com. It's TAY radio1@gmail.com. You can send me, you can follow me on Twitter, tstuch1, TSTUCH1. You can follow me on Periscope, TSTUCH1. You can follow me on my website, tstuch.com. Go to my YouTube page, Taylor Space Stuch, Taylor Space STUCH. And that is it. Thank you.